Okay, so hello everybody, welcome back to another lecture video. In this video, we're starting on brand new content, stuff that isn't reviewed from Econ 201. So we're covering chapter 4 today. And like I said, we're not going to sprint through this material like we have been with the other material because it is new. And so we're going to take our time with chapter 4. I'm going to cover it in over the course of 3 different days to give you guys some time to let the new information sink in. Okay, so chapter 4 is all about consumer behavior. So let's get into it. Let's see. Okay, so there are some key questions in economics that, maybe we're not aware of how to answer, and this chapter will help us figure out how to answer those things. So one big question is, how do consumers decide what to buy? Which goods do they pick? And of course, how much of each good do they decide to buy, right? When I go to the grocery store, I make some decision on what bundle of goods I'm buying from the store, how many apples I get, how many bananas I get, etc. How am I making that choice, right? And so the choice is going to depend on a couple of things. It's going to depend on how much I like the good, right? So my preference is for the good. So if I really like apples, I'll probably buy apples. It also depends on the price of the good, right? So if apples are very expensive, even if I like them a lot, maybe I won't buy them. And then it's also going to depend on the consumer's income. So again, if I have no money, then I can't buy any apples. So it doesn't matter what the price of apples is or how much I like them. Okay, so that's kind of the setup for this chapter. And so let's just continue on. So the first thing we're going to talk about, again, is consumer preferences. And so we have to make a few assumptions about how people are deciding what their preferences are in order to kind of analyze what people decide to do. So we're going to look at 4 different assumptions, and I'll talk about them in depth. We're going to talk about the assumption. We're going to make a completeness and rankability assumption. We're going to assume that more of a good is better than less of a good. We're going to have a transitivity assumption, and then assume that consumers have a love of variety. So they prefer a variety of goods. Okay, so completeness and rankability. This assumption is saying that consumers can compare any 2 bundles of goods and rank them. And so they can rank them as better or worse, or they can say they're completely indifferent between the goods, meaning that they're just as happy with either bundle of goods. All this assumption is ruling out is that consumers can't say, I don't know. So they have to be able to make a determinant about the rank of 2 bundles that they're comparing, right? So you can't say, I don't know. You have to decide which one you like better, or say that you're indifferent between a bundle of goods. Okay, so the next assumption is pretty easy to swallow. So it's more is better. So basically getting an additional good always makes us better off, or at the very least, it doesn't make us worse off. And so we're gonna use this tool called free disposals. This is kind of a sub assumption for this. And basically this means that if we have excess of a good that we don't want, we can dispose of it at 0 cost. So think about bananas, for example. So I'll make the assumption that all of you have some like for bananas, although maybe you don't. So pretend like you like bananas for now, or choose a different good that you do like. And so if you're given 1 banana, that will make you happier, better off. So each banana you get will continue to make you better off. And then even if you get to some point where you have so many bananas that they're just tough to store, you don't know where to put them, they're going to rot and go bad. You have this tool called free disposal. So 1 additional banana at the very worst can do you no harm, because if you get one that will be annoying for you to have, you can always dispose of it at 0 cost. So that's the more is better assumption. Okay, transitivity. So you've probably heard about transitivity in maybe a math class or something. But basically it says that if we prefer good A or bundle A to good or bundle B, and we prefer B to C, that means we must prefer A to C. So I like to, it's really clear if we assign numerical values to each of these. So if A is 4 and B is 2, If we know that B is greater than C, then A also has to be greater than C because A is greater than B, right? And so to use a real world example here, if you're given the option between an apple and a banana and you choose the apple, and then you're given an option between a banana and a coconut and you choose the banana, then when you're given the option between an apple and a coconut, we will assume that you will always pick the apple instead of the coconut. So that's our transitivity assumption. And then, of course, love of variety. So this assumption is saying that the more of a good that a consumer has, the less he is willing to give up in order to get one more of that good. So basically, again, consider having bananas. Your willingness to pay for a banana when you already have 10 is more than your willingness to pay for an additional banana if you have 100 bananas. So I have less here written. So I'm going to cross that out and write more. Right. So in other words, if you have less of a good, you're willing to give up more to get an additional unit of that good than you would be if you had more of that good in total. Right. So if you have an overwhelming amount of bananas, you're not going to be really willing to pay much to get an extra banana. Whereas if you have very few bananas and you want more bananas, you'll be willing to pay a little more to get an extra banana. Okay, so those are our assumptions. So let's talk about utility, because this is going to be a key concept throughout this class and throughout the rest of your learning about economics. And so utility is just a measure of happiness. It tells us how satisfied a consumer is with a certain bundle of goods. And so one thing we can do with utility is express utility as a function of the goods we consume, right? And so this is putting math to words, essentially. And so I'm going to think about a utility function for some consumer who only gets utility from consuming Skittles and M&Ms. So I think this person must be a 3-year-old or something. But essentially, we're going to write a mathematical expression that will determine how much utility this person gets for a certain bundle of Skittles and M&Ms, right? And so we can maybe think about utility function 1 here. And so that says that their utility is equal to the number of Skittles they get plus the number of M&Ms they get. We can think of a different utility function that says their utility is equal to the number of Skittles they have squared times the number of M&Ms they have. Or again, you could pick a third utility function that is the number of Skittles they have to the power of 0.7 times the number of M&Ms they have to the power of 0.3, right? So utility functions can be all sorts of things. And basically we use them to determine what somebody's utility is for a certain bundle, right? So if I gave you numerical values for how many Skittles somebody had and how many M&Ms somebody had, we could determine utility in each of those cases. So if you want to do this on your own, if I tell you Skittles equals 10 and M&Ms equals 50, you can plug these values into these utility functions and get a value for utility. So in the case of the first utility function, since I can do this math in my head, if S is 10, Skittles are 10, plus we have 50 M&Ms, our utility is just 10 plus 50 or 60. Okay, so that's what we're doing with utility functions. Now, since we're economists and we think at the margin, we're going to want to think about what marginal utility is. And so marginal, again, is the additional, right? So we're thinking about the additional utility we get from consuming one additional unit of a good, right? And so we can write the marginal utility of a Skittle, right? So I'm picking Skittles again because that's the utility function I'm writing. So the marginal utility of a Skittle is just the change in utility we get, or the amount our utility changes when we change our Skittles by 1 unit, right? So how much extra utility do we get when we are given 1 extra Skittle? And then similarly, we can write the marginal utility for an M&M in this way: the change in utility divided by the change in M&Ms. Okay, so one important thing to think about is that comparing people's utility is a little difficult. We can't kind of do all the comparisons that you might think of. So what we can do is we can compare bundles of goods for a single consumer, right? So one thing we can say is we have a consumer, Steve, we can say Steve prefers apples to bananas, right? Apples to bananas, not do bananas. Apples to bananas. That is, Steve gets more utility from consuming an apple than he does from consuming a banana. So that's something we can say. So that works. Some of the things we cannot do, one is compare bundles between two consumers. So we can't say that Steve likes apples more than Stacy likes apples, right? So maybe Steve's utility function tells us that one apple gives him 10 utility, and Stacy's utility function tells us that she gets 8 utility from an apple. We can't compare those utility numbers across consumers. So we can't do that. So that's a no-no. Okay, and then the other thing we can't do is determine how much more a consumer likes one bundle over the other. So we can say that Steve likes apples more than he likes bananas, but we can't say Steve likes apples twice as much as he likes bananas, right? So, so we can order these things, but we can't make basically a magnitude argument, right? So we know that Steve likes apples more than he likes bananas, but even if his utility function is telling us, so utility from an apple is 20 and utility from a banana is 10, we can't make the determination that Steve likes apples twice as much as he likes bananas. So that's something we cannot do. Okay, and just so some examples to clarify what we can and cannot do here. We just have 2 questions here. So if Steve has an apple, and we know that Stacy gets more utility from an apple than Steve, would we improve welfare by taking the apple from Steve and giving it to Stacy? And the answer is we don't know. Because even though Stacy's utility from getting an apple may be higher, we can't directly compare Stacy's utility to Steve's utility. So we can't say whether society or 2 of them are better off in total if Stacy gets the apple after we take it away from Steve. Okay, and then a second example here. Suppose we have an apple and a banana to distribute to Steve and Stacy. Steve prefers apples to bananas, and Stacy prefers bananas to apples. And assume that we only have 2 options. We can either give the apple to Steve and the banana to Stacy, or the opposite, we give Steve the banana and Stacy the apple. So either way, we have to give one of these to each of them. Can we determine which outcome would be better? And the answer here is actually yes. And this is because we know that if Steve gets the apple, he's better off than if he gets the banana. And we know that Stacy would be better off if she got the banana than if she got the apple. And so we can say, if both of them are better off in one circumstance than they would be in the other circumstance, we can say that in total, both of them would be better. So in sum, they would be better, right? So if they're each individually better off, we can make that determination because we can compare utility within a person. Then we can also make the assumption that it's making everybody better off, which is just Steve and Stacy in this case. Okay, so I'm going to cut off the video here, and in the next video, we'll continue to talk about utility, and I'll introduce indifference curves.